Speaking of disparity, I don't love to embellish after week one because I understand that week one it's easy to kind of be a prisoner of the moment. It's easy to make grand assumptions, make bold predictions and proclamations after week one. And Matthew Stafford made his debut for the Rams yesterday. Highly anticipated debut. SoFi Stadium was finally filled with fans. It's an absolutely beautiful stadium. In fact, I actually saw SoFi Stadium from a bird's eye view flying in from New York last week. It's a gorgeous stadium. It's Sunday Night Football. The whole world is watching. And again, I don't want to make a bold proclamation after week one with the Rams kind of romping the Bears 34-14 on Sunday Night Football. I don't want to make a big proclamation and say definitively that Matthew Stafford is head and shoulders better than Jared Goff or is definitively going to attain more success in LA than Jared Goff, that he's a massive upgrade, because the reality is Jared Goff did lead the Rams to a Super Bowl. So I am not going to make those bold proclamations after week one. But did you see the first game? Matthew Stafford absolutely lit up the Bears on two plays. And it's the two important plays to highlight when you're thinking about Matthew Stafford, when you're thinking about the Rams, and why Sean McVay was so eager and enthralled when he acquired Matthew Stafford. Literally the first play for the Rams highlights why they traded for Matthew Stafford. The very first play on offense, 67-yard bomb to Van Jefferson from Matthew Stafford. They didn't even try to run it first. They said, the hell with that. We're going to exploit this guy's new arm. And it was only fitting, again, that the first game being played at SoFi with fans, Sunday Night Football, the lone game on in the NFL Sunday night. And Sean McVay just wanted to kind of showcase his new toy, showcase his new flamethrower, showcase his new quarterback in Matthew Stafford. And of course, it was also only fitting that Andy Dalton would get picked off in the end zone on the Bears' opening drive. Of course, that would set the tone for the rest of the game, that the Rams defense came away with a takeaway in the end zone. And then the two first touchdowns scored by the Rams were two bombs that highlight the difference in playing styles and in coaching styles. Because the reality is, this is precisely why the Rams traded for Matthew Stafford. In fact, there was an interesting website that came out with a stat called Brick Wall Blitz Stats, which basically broke down all 32 of the starting quarterbacks in the NFL from last season and analyzed which quarterbacks were the best at throwing the deep ball last year. Those were yards of those constituted 21 plus yard passes from a season ago. And according to these stats, Matthew Stafford finished 9th in the top 10, and he completed, they said, 56% of his passes 21 plus yards down the field. Top 10. Jared Goff, out of 32 starting quarterbacks, was 30th in the NFL. Completed 34% of those passes. And in fact, he was dead last. He was 3 of 19 in accuracy on tight window throws of 21 plus yards or more. That was dead last in the NFL last year. He was 0 for 9 on those deep balls when under pressure. And they go into other different stats and other notes that kind of highlight how Matthew Stafford is much more willing to take a chance deep. Jared Goff is much more risk averse. And this isn't to insult Jared Goff, because this is a guy that led the Rams to a Super Bowl. And this is not to disparage him in any way. But it does highlight And by the way, Jared Goff actually nearly completed a magical run with the Lions in his debut against the San Francisco 49ers, who throughout the majority of his career was kind of his kryptonite. But it does highlight the difference between the two quarterbacks and the play calling that it opens up, because that was the difference, is it allows for more big play opportunities for Sean McVay. It really does. And the shame is that Cam Akers tore his Achilles. And that's a huge blow for this team, because their running game didn't look great with Darrell Henderson. It kind of opened up a little bit late. That's kind of when it got going. Because this team right now, with the play action pass now with Matt Stafford, given you already have Van Jefferson, who played extremely well, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods with Stafford, Tyler Higbee as your definitive number one tight end with that elite defense. And I think this team is the second best team, arguably is the second best team in the NFC. I don't think it's too far-fetched to make that type of claim at all. And so that's kind of the takeaway from the Rams' perspective. That was the big takeaway for me. But for the Bears, this was the last game that Andy Dalton's going to start for them. I said this before. I'll say it again. Justin Fields should be the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears. And again, this is also not meant to be a jab or to take a slight at Andy Dalton, because it's not his fault that their offensive line isn't good and they weren't able to hold up particularly well. That's not his fault. And he's a good guy. I like Andy Dalton. But the reality is, you saw the impact that Justin Fields made in 2 plays. How much more dynamic he is and how much more dynamic this offense is with him. You can open up the entire playbook for Matt Nagy, who's a really creative head coach, especially an offensively minded head coach. The 2 plays, one completed pass, again, just 9 yards. Then he rushed in a touchdown. 2 plays, 2 impactful plays. One was for a first down, that pass. So while I disagreed with the decision to start Andy Dalton in week 1, I thought they should have started Justin Fields, but I understand the rationale given you're playing against Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey and this ferocious Rams defense that was the number 1 rated defense in the NFL last year. You want to give him an opportunity to take a look at a defense, not get absolutely crushed, not get absolutely swallowed up by those defensive ends and those defensive tackles. Fine. You don't want to start him. You don't want to feed him to the Wolves. Fine. Understandably, and it's understandable for week 1. Well, week 2 is against the Cincinnati Bengals. Much less daunting, much less intimidating type of opponent to face, despite their impressive win over the Vikings in overtime. So if you didn't want to start him in week 1, well, now you have the opportunity to start him in week 2 against the Cincinnati Bengals. Because again, Fields showed even in those 2 plays how drastically better he is than Andy Dalton. That's the big takeaway.